Tales of Vesperia, the 10th Mothership title, and what do I even say? For those of you joining for the first time, welcome! It's great to have you here as we continue this random order across the entire Tales series for this lineup of reviews. We've got a lot of regulars though, and I can't keep my thoughts on this game a secret at all. I love this game, and it's gone on record as my absolute favorite of all time, which is one heck of a title. I've played a lot of games over the years, but none have gripped me to the same level before or after playing this one. But that's just me speaking as biased and personally driven as possible. I've never made a full-on review and analysis diving deep into how things work while giving it the critical eye. And it's weird because after Definitive Edition came out, Vesperia sort of dropped in regards to how well received it is by fans. Vesperia used to be a 360 exclusive back when it originally released in August of 2008, and for the few JRPG fans who had a 360 that played it, they loved it. It was then re-released on the PS3 September of 2009, exclusively in Japan with boatloads of extra content, and for those who understand Japanese or simply imported it, they loved it even more. It became a bit of a meme in the Tales community as another addition to the pile of Tales games that refused to leave Japan as
that one.
But to everyone's surprise,
that one
was announced to be coming to all current gen consoles as Tales of Vesperia Definitive Edition, including all the PS3 exclusive content completely and officially translated. That's the version we'll be looking at today, being that it's just Tales of Vesperia with more added onto it, making for the true experience the game wanted to be from the start. And it could only have gone well being that the game was formerly known as one of the very best Tales games, but while critics seem to still very much enjoy it, fan reception has been pretty lukewarm. I don't know about you all, but it seems every corner I turn, the next new person to play Vesperia always highlights that while it's a good game, it isn't the best. And for a while, that was really frustrating to me because a lot of people were specifically telling me that I was wrong in calling it the best Tales game. Gotta love it when your opinion's wrong, huh? It was confusing too because people who already loved Vesperia still held Definitive Edition in high regard, but when it came to newer fans, they weren't as into the overall experience as everyone else. Now, this doesn't apply to every single person, I know that, but a vocal portion of the fandom made it very clear that not everyone loved the game as much as myself and many others. For a while, I wasn't sure why, but after playing the game even more than I already have, being that it's now on the beauty and grace known as the Nintendo Switch, I understand this game even more than I already did before. Today we're going to talk about what works in this game, what doesn't, and what you can expect from it so I can give as educated a recommendation as possible. Because as much as I love this game, I understand that it's not for everyone and why that is. However, I also understand why every time I play the game, I love it more and more because even being as critical as possible, this is still a ridiculously solid game, just in different ways than the newer titles that have been attracting more fans as of late, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Took a bit of a breather last review, but we're jumping headfirst into another JRPG, so grab a snack, get yourself some of that Gucci water, and let's dive into my review for Tales of Vesperia. Fun fact, this is the first game in the franchise to ever be released on an HD console, and sweet Rise Kujikawa, what a jump in quality that did this series well. In my humble opinion, this is the best looking game across the whole franchise, at least until Arise inevitably comes out because holy crap, which is both a huge compliment to Vesperia's quality and kinda sad, especially since we've seen titles on the likes of the PS4. What's the deal? Whatever. Let's focus on this game for the time being because my goodness is it beautiful. The cell shading does this game so much justice, letting the colors be vibrant and pop right off the screen, environments are memorable and incredible on the eyes, spells are jaw-dropping, and thanks to Definitive Edition, the game runs at 60 FPS, not just on the battlefield but on the overworld, in towns, and dungeons. Although it's not as consistent as the most recent entry, I found that the frame rate is much smoother when indoors, although it runs smooth enough all things considered. And while there are areas when the game's clearly suffering, like in Dongress or anywhere heavily populated, it's not as distracting as the Exilia games or Abyss World map. It's good, but I wouldn't have minded a frame rate locked at 60. Also, the character models look great, but when in motion, they leave a lot to be desired. There's a lot of clipping, be it with hair or putting their hands through something, and animations are pretty stiff and awkward in most places. But at the same time, they're so expressive and emote like never before, making me unable to dislike the character models too much. Plus, aesthetically, these are some great designs. They're not as involved as other designs in the series, being much more casual, but ironically, that makes them stick out. You know you've made a great outfit for your protagonist when you give the costume to literally every other protagonist in the series. Moving right along, anime cutscenes still bring the heat. Being that this game was made before the Exilia duology, Ufotable wasn't brought to the team to animate these. But they aren't the only animation company that can make some good anime cutscene, and the ones in Vesperia are beautiful. Same for the game's CG cutscenes. Yeah, remember when the Tale series did these every other blue moon? They look freaking incredible too, or at least they used to, because unfortunately they're pre-rendered. That being said, the Definitive Edition makes them look all grainy, especially when things get visually involved, which is a shame because they were some of of the best looking parts in one of the best looking Tales games. Ah well. Visually the game's got it on lock, and I'd argue the same sound wise. Let's talk about the voice acting first. The game's dub is one of the very best I've heard, and I'd argue it's got the best voice acting in the series. Characters deliver every line with more than the needed emotion, and it pulls you into every scene like nothing before. Well, unless it's a newly added scene for Definitive Edition. I talked about this in my review of Definitive Edition's added portions specifically to the main game, but the newly dubbed scenes feature some new voice actors for characters whose original voices couldn't return, and it's very distracting for the two in the main party who suffered from this, Yuri and Judith.
Intend to. I already have.
I'm coming for you, Mortio.
I used to be in the Imperial Knights. This was a going-away present.
If you're gonna heal something, maybe you could heal the barrier itself.
I always say, those who can, should. Well, this should do for a while. I'll take this. I wasn't aware Brave Vesperia was formed to follow your random whims. All right, if we find anyone being forced to work, let's tell them to run.
Not even a few of the side characters are safe from this issue.
We crossed paths during the assault on the city. Now then, what business did you have?
Quite the strapping young lad, aren't you? What's your name?
I know he's poor, but breaking into an aristocrat's house? My, how the mighty have fallen.
And then we can clamp Yuri in chains where he belongs!
Some people say they can't tell the difference, and good for you. But I do, and it's super distracting that two of my favorite characters sound different in various new scenes or ones that previously weren't voiced over. It's not that one voice is necessarily better than the other, even if my heart will always belong to the original cast, but the translation itself is much sloppier than before, and it's clear that less time was spent translating the newer scenes and even the scenes that weren't previously voiced. Voice actors would talk about how they worked with the voice directors in terms of ad-libbing and making the translated script sound more natural in English, but I don't think the same amount of effort was given with the newly dubbed scenes, at least not to the same extent as before. As such, even characters whose original voice actors came back sound just that bit off to make a difference to players new and old. And I don't just mean the tone of voice. This version of the game came out 10 years after the original, so of course the voice actors will have grown since then, and it can't be helped that they are unable to perfectly replicate how they originally sounded. However, the script itself doesn't sound as natural as the original voiced scenes, and the delivery for a few lines just sound off, not to mention some terminology is pronounced incorrectly, which is baffling. A bit of a shame that things had to be this way, because if the game was just fully voiced and complete in the first place, we wouldn't have this issue. But that's not how things ended up being, so the problem is very much apparent. And what the heck's up with some of the new dialogue, specifically in skits, being so freaking quiet?
Very nice. I'm actually worried where my eyes might wander.
You don't look all that worried to me.
I've just got a good poker face.
Lynn, didn't you come here with Sodia?
I did. Sodia and the others are busy arresting and taking Revo away, so I'm on my own.
How does something like this even happen? Just turn up the volume for these lines. Overall, I'd still call the dub fantastic, especially with Patty's English voice fitting her perfectly, but yeah, you get the point. I've been saying a lot of negative aspects about Definitive Edition, so let's talk about one of the many things it does right: dual audio. If the inconsistency bothers you enough, the Japanese voice work is fantastic, not to mention consistent for all characters. That's always a plus. You know what else is a plus? This game's soundtrack. I find this OST a lot better than people give it credit for, being really well put together and very memorable. This game was during the era where every dungeon would have a distinct theme, so with all those on top of talents, world map tracks, great boss battle songs, and battle themes, this soundtrack's solid. Not to mention the PS3 version and up added even more tracks to make certain moments, set pieces, new bosses, and previous locations have even more distinction. Love it, just like I love this game's presentation as a whole. While there are some hiccups, mostly due to Definitive Edition ironically enough, it's still one of the best looking games in the franchise due to its cell shading, the characters and environments designed to be iconic and recognizable, voice work is astounding when talking about the original dub and Patty's voice, and the soundtrack is great. Cool stuff all around, and it's nice to know that I'm enjoying the visuals and audio the whole way through the game's campaign and beyond. Speaking of the game's campaign, why don't we go ahead and dive into that as we discuss Vesperia story. It's got a lot of interesting things going on, both good and bad, but let's refresh our memory before we get into things. Shouldn't take too long because I'll say right off the bat that Vesperia does not take its time with setting itself up and getting things moving early on. Our protagonist this time around is Yuri freaking Lowell, an ex-knight who lives in the lower quarter of the world capital Zaphias, helping out with the townspeople there while sticking it to the nobles and higher-ups. Anime Robin Hood? Anime Robin Hood, but with a badass sidekick dog who wields a dagger and smokes a pipe. Repeat is the best mascot in the series. Sorry, I don't make the rules. On the day our story begins, the fountain in the lower quarter was supposed to be fixed by a mage from the upper quarter of the capital, but they ended up doing the exact opposite, sending the area into a frenzy, much to Yuri's displeasure. He tries to catch up and show them who they're messing with, but gets caught by the knights and thrown into jail. Just another Tuesday in the life of Yuri freaking Lowell. He even breaks himself free easily enough. Wow, it really is Tuesday. On the way out, he runs into a mysterious girl by the name of Estelise, who's breaking out of the castle herself, even though she seems to live there by the way she's dressed and how the knights treat her. Also, it kind of showed her in the world building scene at the beginning of the game, that too. But when she mentions that she has to warn Flynn, Yuri decides to help her out, being that Flynn is an old friend of Yuri's back when he was a knight. The two team up, and once they deal with an assassin who confuses Yuri for Flynn, somehow, they make it out and agree to help each other. Estelle needs protecting to make it to Flynn and warn him about a great evil or whatever, and Yuri's gonna fix his plumbing. With the help of the greatest character of all time, they set off to unknown territory outside of the capital and get tangled up in matters much bigger than they could ever expect, surrounding conspiracies within the Empire and guilds, mysteries of the world, and finding out what, in fact, is true justice. Holy crap, I summarized the plot in one paragraph! This wasn't just possible due to me shortening my script length, because believe me, I still suck in that regard. But the story of Vesperia begins as a humble little tale. It of course gets much more involved the further you go, but it knows that things are simple at the start, so it doesn't waste your time. And you'll be out of the capital and on your way towards the real adventure in around an hour and a half. And that's if you take your time like I did. Great start, but does it keep up that momentum? For the most part, yes. The pacing in this game is excellent because you're always having a reason to move forward, and even if your characters are aimless for the time being, it doesn't take long for a new objective to show up or for more conflict to arise. I never felt as if there was a part of the game that dragged, and especially during Act 2, things were moving at the perfect pace. Once crazy things and scenarios started happening left and right, that's because the tension was heightened and crap was starting to hit the fan, making it work. Unfortunately, pacing got a little sloppy around the game's third and final act. Felt as if the game was losing steam here and there wasn't enough going on narratively to warrant a third act. Wasn't big on the newly introduced conflict either, especially because it tosses the game's themes it was surrounding the narrative with aside for something else. More on that later. Not to mention, it's a bit Zelda-esque with how you have to go to specially marked locations to get X, Y, and Z, with the plot moving at a crawl until you're done, and it's a step down from how things were earlier. People say it ruins the story, but I wouldn't go that far, especially because I did still end up loving the endgame and conclusion. Still quite a step down though. It's also a shame that the third act doesn't just suffer from pacing issues. Let's talk about the problems I have thematically, because as I alluded to earlier, it also completely disregards the game's main theme, what is true justice. And that's a darn shame. For the first two acts of the game, you see a lot of commentary on the injustices of the world Terca Lumere, and how different characters react to it all, made for some incredibly intriguing dynamics, decisions, and conflicts surrounding what's my favorite theme to tackle in a narrative. It was especially awesome regarding the rivalry between Yuri and Flynn, as both had their own definition of true justice, ultimately driving a wedge between best friends. As a result, we get some of the best scenes in the entire franchise between different party members, and especially the two boys. It's really interesting how they handle this, especially with the main villain thrown into the mix, but then it all gets thrown out of the window on the third act, focusing more on the game's technology and how that affects the lives of the people. Why would they do that? I and many others found this story much more intriguing when discovering true justice was the main focus, but it feels like the writers didn't make the main conflicts around the lines of we need to save the world, so they threw something in right at the end of Act 2, and as such, the story takes such a sharp turn that it begins to fall flat on top of pacing issues around this time. It's even more baffling that the story would do this because its narrative is driven by the characters and their development more so than any other Tales game to this day. The story literally starts about Yuri trying to fix his plumbing and Estelle wanting to warn her friend, with others tagging along to handle their own affairs, being the desire to start a guild or studying another character. There's no narratively centered conflict for a while, and when there is, it directly correlates with whatever a party member or a few party members were trying to accomplish or find out. And it was working. Stakes were still being raised enough to keep things interesting and moving. It was just a new way to progress things, which is why the sudden shift to a conflict that was slightly foreshadowed earlier is so bizarre. It's not a character-driven story anymore, and that's jarring. Not to mention disappointing, because due to the story being so focused on the characters on top of the series' already great characterization, this has gone on record as my favorite cast in all of gaming. I don't throw that term around lightly, but this game made me care so much about good characterization, and is a huge reason why a solid cast is the most important aspect to me when it comes to a good story. This cast has seen a lot of heat from from a vocal minority because while it's still popular, they've had their fair share of times put on blast. I could not disagree more with the criticisms these characters have seen because I don't think there's a single weak link. Yuri is an incredibly strong protagonist that sees a lot of development the whole way through while maintaining his badass attitude. Sure, it's not as much as someone like Luke or Jude, but why does it have to be? He grows enough to stay an engaging lead to the cast while being a role model for the characters so that they can grow to a great extent. He ends the game completely different than how he started, and it happens so casually you don't even notice. Yuri relishes in his subtlety and natural growth, so it's unfortunate that because he makes a lot of wild, flawed decisions that people give him hate. He's not perfect, he's not supposed to be, and that's what makes him so great. His flaws as a person make you want to see him ultimately do the right thing, making him an incredibly human and down-to-earth character that I adore. I'm so tired of seeing people rag on him for not following this beta template of how to be a main character. He's different than any other protagonist, and that's a good thing. It's no wonder that he's in the Tales Characters Hall of Fame. He's best boy. In fact, about half of this cast all have incredibly subtle and natural development, which is a big part of why they work. There are enough characters that give you a lot to chew on without thinking about it too much, and characters that require you to take a deeper look to understand where they started and how they got to where they ended up as the credits roll to balance things out and keep everything interesting. Even the 100% new addition, Patty, fits right in with the group having an arc of her own and fitting into the story as if she were there the whole time. For those who played through the original 360 release, it may seem odd at first, but that's just due to her not having been there originally. That first time through's weird, but you'll get used to her with time, and for those who haven't played the game at all, you may not even notice if you weren't aware she wasn't there at the start. I'd even argue that the main antagonists are just as good. All of them require you to take that deeper dive to understand their motivation and how much of a presence they had the whole time, but the info's there, and to the game's credit, they have a lot of depth and reason to act the way they do. There are one or two exceptions of one-dimensional antagonists, and as for the side characters, there's only one I didn't care for. Sodia. But all in all, the cast is it's just so good. The cherry on top, the world building in this game is one of the best in the franchise. The game immerses you with its rules, laws, and layout thanks to making the game's technology, Blastia, as well as air so prevalent. A bit too prevalent in the third arc, but details. The divide between the guilds and empire only suck you in that much more, and all the lore, history, so on and so forth, make Terga Lumere a living, breathing world. Gameplay strengthens this aspect as well, but in a way we'll get to when we start discussing that. Not too far from now, because that about covers my thoughts and everything surrounding the story. It's great! While the third act leaves a lot to be desired, the character-driven nature while commentating on true justice and unity were great enough to make me recall the narrative as fantastic, all things considered. Not to mention the complete cast still remains my absolute favorite, and no matter how many times I come back to replay the game, I love seeing how their arcs progress and where they end up come the grand finale. Good stuff all around. Yes, that's actually what this battle system is called. Wow. Well, odd names aside, this system in more simple terms is an evolution of Abyss battle system, one that also makes it very hard to go back to that game because this battle system is tight. It's before AC and CC became a main factor in the series battle system, and that right there is a plus for me. And first things first, please don't misunderstand me, I like the AC and CC systems. I just preferred how things were handled before, more specifically in this game. To refresh ourselves on what exactly you can do, you have your basic attacks and arts once again. This time, however, there are different tiers of arts, being base arts and the more powerful and expensive arcane arcs, just like the good old days, which is how this series used to handle arts in the first place. Also, you have a free run attack, which seemed to disappear after this game, as attacking in free run would just result in you doing a standard combo. All that being said, your max combo potential at the start of the game is very simple. 3 basic attacks, a free run attack if you're quick enough, a base art, and finally an arcane art. You can free run to move on the Z-axis, jump, block, use items, and yeah, that's about it. That's what you're given to work with at the start, and I will say that while I understand making magic art a skill, backstep 2? Really? Earlier Tales games and ones to follow this give you backstep from the start, so that was a strange decision. Other than that though, the simple nature of the battle system is only the start, because as you progress over the game, you'll gradually gain more and more features to the battle system. Loads of Tales games now give you almost everything right at the start, but Vesperia's combat is constantly evolving almost the whole way through, be it with new mechanics or skills that really change the game. Soon you'll gain access to Overlimit, which is as simple to activate as the press of a button, thank God, including multiple levels of said Overlimit. While in the state, you can attack and chain arts as much as your heart desires or until you run out of TP, and later stages of Overlimit build on this by picking up enemies when knocked down with any attack to keep your combo count going. Arts will only use 1 TP, you'll have access to burst arts, more on these later, mystic arts, higher tier mystic arts, and even full-on invincibility. It's a lot, but most of these require to use higher levels of Overlimit, meaning using up more of the single bar of Overlimit you share with the party, which is a bit of a problem if you want your AI to use Overlimit or you're playing with friends. Fear not, because even though though there's only one bar unlike Abyss where every character had their own gauge, the multiple levels that just stack on top of each other more and more on top of skills that let characters enter overlimit through different methods alleviates the issue to almost become obsolete. Later on, you'll start getting access to mechanics exclusive to Vesperia, starting with the Fatal Strikes, where if you combo enemies enough, you can use an attack that'll instantly kill them in cinematic fashion, unless they're a boss where you'll just do a ton of damage. There are also the before mentioned Burst Arts, being flashy attacks a tier above normal arts but just below Mystic Arts. They're pretty cool and allow for greater combo potential, not to mention they're extended and more powerful on higher levels of overlimit. And finally, there's a new tier of arts, Altered Arts. Secret attacks that require you to have certain skills to even discover, and you have to use that attack a bunch to learn it for your own use. Kinda like Abyss Field of Phonon attacks, but you can learn and weave them into your combos whenever you want. If you couldn't tell, Vesperia leans very heavily on comboing, and all the additions it makes really emphasize that. And I love that, because all the characters' combo potential are so good and satisfying to pull off. Skills directly help with this, be it giving characters more attacks all the way up to 9 normal hits, and stringing different tiers of arts like base to ultra to arcane, all the way up to something crazy like what you're seeing on screen. The sky's the limit, but you gotta earn it, not only by naturally progressing over the campaign with level ups and new skills, but figuring out which arts link better between others, as not every single art can combo out of another like the newer games tend to do. This time around, some arts are best used as starters or finishing attacks that can potentially lead to a Fatal Strike, and I'd much rather have something like that. This is the main reason why I don't prefer the AC and CC systems, because the games with those have to make sure that every art can combo between one another due to your combos only being limited by how many numbers you have left. But in a title like Vesperia, you have to work for the higher numbers while maintaining that team synergy that Tales games encourage. And there are tons of more hidden techniques in this game than just about any other 3D title. For example, certain free run attacks and arts can pick knockdown enemies right back up so you can keep that combo counter going. Another example, Manu 1 spell canceling to lessen cooldown animations after finishing a combo. Stuff like that gives this game's combat an incredible amount of depth that not only opens up the further you get into the game, but also requires you to take the time and learn the ins and outs of combat to come out on top. It's not very newcomer friendly, as if you don't take the extra step to understand all Vesperia is trying to do combat wise, you could find it very bland like a lot of people who recently played the game tend to do. But I really respect how the game demands you to take the initiative to understand it in order to get the most out of it. I really love that there's so much to unpack without it being shoved in your face or easy to do. Vesperia is an easy game to learn, but rough as hell to master, and those make for my favorite forms of gameplay with real-time action like this. Keep in mind, this applies to every playable character, maybe even more so because the characters are even less newcomer friendly, as they aren't as simple to grasp as Yuri, more so than usual with the series. Learning these other party members, much like learning the game's combat, requires hard work, and that right there is why I believe so many people just getting into Vesperia through Definitive Edition to hold the game in lower regard than before. When Vesperia originally came out, this was the natural evolution of the Tales games before it, and as such, everything about it was just better. Now that Tales games have taken a different approach to combat, not necessarily a better one, people still swear by how Vesperia handles things, it's just harder to come back to it. Newer Tales games are faster and add more conveniences to the player while easing the learning curve and not requiring you to take too deep a dive to get the real substance out of them. You don't have to work as hard to get some flashy combos in the likes of Exilia and Graces, basically titles after Vesperia. This title needs that extra effort on the player's end, and while it's fun work, it's still work, and not everyone plays video games to do that. You can't hold it against people who don't have any interest in taking the extra time to get the same experience that's handed to them in more modern titles, which is why I believe people aren't so big on this game like fans used to be. That's pretty sad too, because when you do give the game the time to learn its ins and outs, you've got one of the finest battle systems in the series to this day. Give the other party members some time in the lab and skills you learn over the adventure, and you'll be juggling foes in the air with Judy, changing forms based on the situation, embedding it all with Patty, and casting high tier spells left and right with mages, potentially even comboing those, or you know, just spamming or whatever. Now in regards to skills, this time around you learn them from different weapons. This allows them to not be relegated to which one has higher numbers, but what they teach you, as you'll gain access to more and more weapons over the course of the game that teach you different things, such as backstep, magic guard, and critical guard, alongside the character's specific skills to help differentiate them all, and more combo extenders. I really like this way of giving the player new skills, as you gain LP from doing battle and get a ton from fulfilling certain conditions. With different skills requiring different amounts of LP, you'll be switching around weapons a lot, and not necessarily just for the strongest one, but for a skill you want to learn. To this day, it's my favorite way of learning skills in the series, as it gives weapons a much more prominent and important role, and it's a different form of growth completely separate from leveling up. Now when it comes to SP, what you use to equip the skills you learn, the game's really strict on how much it gives you after each level up, but people say this is a huge problem. I would disagree, because it gives you enough to have to choose which skills are more important to you at the time. You focus on the skills that buff your stats, or on combo extenders and altered art skills. Maybe the character specific ones, general skills everyone learns, turns, you've got to pick and choose, and only when you get to those super high levels post-game will you be able to equip almost all of them. This makes sense as it allows you the freedom in how your character will grow over the game, gives you customization options, and it limits you on just how many powerful skills you can equip a fair ways in. Why on earth would the game just hand you every single skill? They're arguably the most important part of the game's combat, and much like the rest of it, you've got to work for them. When you do finally earn all the top tier skills and heighten your skill level through your own personal growth, you'll start pulling off flashy movements and attacks left and right while raising your enjoyment with combat. The game never reaches that level of speed that newer games have, but since when was speed the determining factor in deciding a battle system's quality? Vesperia has rhythm and purpose with how fast things happen, making the game not the fastest thing alive but far from sluggish. It's because of all this and how much there is to discover, both taught to you and required to figure out on your own, the skills and heavy emphasis on racking up the combo counter, that Tales of Vesperia has my favorite battle system out of any Tales game. Yeah, I'm serious. Vesperia's combat is just so clean, and the fact that I'm the only thing stopping me from getting more out of an already great battle system is so gosh darn cool. Not to mention the difficulty scaling is just right, with enemies gradually getting harder the further you go in, forcing the player to get a handle on the battle system already. Bosses bring the heat too, as this game's selection of boss battles is one of the better ones, be it a giant foe that you have to take down, or an enemy more on your level. They're a ton of fun and challenging. They also have secret missions that act as alternate weak points to exploit through hidden means, or is just the hidden thing to find for some extra grade. Some are a bit too cryptic and there's no way you're gonna find out all these without a guide, but the extra grade is nice. Oh yeah, grades in this game. You remember this stuff? Back in classic Tales, you'd get grade at the end of battles for fulfilling special objectives, like ending a battle quickly, having a high combo count, using fatal strikes, blah blah blah. But you can also lose grade if you're sloppy by getting hit, using items too much, dying, etc. The amount you've accumulated at the end of the game can be used in the New Game Plus grade shop, where you can select some benefits for future playthroughs. It's cool, and while future games still had grade, it stopped being a reward at the end of combat and rather an in-game achievement sort of deal, which I like a lot less than how this game and earlier titles did. Chalk that up as another reason why I love this battle system so much. It's simply fantastic all around, even if it's not perfect. There are a handful of difficulty spikes, with the worst one happening right at the end if you're one to do all side quests, or the bigger ones as you progress through the game. You get a super secret final boss and it's such a jump in levels that pretty much forces you to grind. And before you call me out for saying that you never have the grind in the series, technically it's optional, so back off. That's also why I don't despise this issue too much. It's completely optional, and while I wish the game made it impossible for this to happen on your first run through the game, just take my advice and hold off on the Phil Arm side quest until you finish the game. You'll thank me later. The game also suffers some slowdown if things get too complicated, which is a shame since this is the definitive edition and you'd think that the game wouldn't have this issue anymore, being that it's being released on more powerful hardware than prior. Or maybe this is just another Switch issue. Regardless, wish this wasn't a problem. Again, not sure why backstep wasn't a part of the base kit. That seemed like an obvious thing to do. Altered arts take just a bit too long to learn, requiring a whopping 100 uses for strike arts and 50 for spells, which is ridiculous and grindy, especially if you want all of them like me. And finally, I wish there was some way to make party members just use items. The most they can do is request use an item, and you press a button to either accept or cancel the request. But either way, you have to do a lot of waiting for characters to just use the item. I found that changing the settings to make it so that you press a button to accept a party member's item request made the process of them using items a lot quicker. But when things are getting involved in combat, you aren't always able to press the stick button every few seconds. Found it much easier to give my teammates direct orders to use items, but that required me to pause the fight, select the item menu, choose which character will use the item, pick the item, then tell which character to use said item on. I miss auto items, as that's one modern addition that's hard not to have anymore, but at least characters will use items during battle at all. Other than those, we're all good. I loved fighting battles over and over again, experimenting with different characters, practicing combos and hitting techniques, and taking down all the bosses both mandatory and optional. It's easily the high point of the gameplay, but does that mean the rest of it isn't good on their own right? Let's talk about them. Other than battling, we've got quite a bit to do in the game. First, the towns, dungeons, and overworld. Towns are fairly small when compared to the rest of the series, but that's alright, just something I noticed. They got NPCs to talk to and stuff to do, be it side quests or minigames, which is cool and makes each place stand out not just aesthetically. Nothing crazy or anything, but the dungeons though? Unlike the Exilia duology, these were actually designed with some purpose. Dungeons have puzzles and fun set pieces to make each one stand out, and I like the effort. Plus, due to this game having the good old Sorcerer's Ring, a little key item to get fairly early on that shoots out energy, a lot of puzzles use that, but in different ways to keep shooting things from getting stale. There are some clever puzzles in this game and fun dungeons to traverse through. However, there are a good amount of puzzles that aren't designed well due to being way too spread out over a dungeon. Lots of them require you to run back and forth and all over the place to do a simple task that could have been closer together, and especially when you get to the bigger locations, it's so tiresome to run everywhere. I appreciate the effort though, and I mean that. I miss when dungeons had this kind of work put into them, even if not all of them this time around were winners. They're memorable if anything, and I'll take that. As for the overworld, oh my gosh, does going back to classic Tales games mean better world maps too? Or world maps at all? Sorry, I know games after the Exilia duology handled this aspect better, but just coming off of those two games, my gosh, it's so good to see something like this. This thing's tight, as there's a lot to explore, and how you go about exploring it is up to you. Layout-wise, I really enjoy this world map, and think it's one of the better ones in that regard. Not to mention it further immerses you into the world. Even in the post-game, because a big chunk of the world map is optional, the game encourages the player to explore and find more areas on your own. I just wish there was a better sense of scale because it's non-existent. Your characters almost look as big as the towns you're traveling to. Not to mention going through the world map over the course of the story is pretty linear. If it was scaled to a more believable size, perhaps with a third-person view to fully engage you in the forests and deserts you traverse through, while having interesting landscapes and ways to travel to your next destination, it'd be awesome. As it is though, it's still pretty decent. Hey, it's better than what would immediately precede it, that's for sure. The game also has its fair share of side quests, but this was before the time where it was easier to find out how to trigger them without a guide. There's zero implication on where and how to access these, and being that this game loves its side quests that span the entire adventure, Vesperia is infamous for having incredibly difficult to access and missable side quests. It's a shame too, because there are a lot of good ones narratively anyway. Gameplay wise, it's a lot of go here, talk to that person, yada yada yada, but there are a fair share of ones that shake things up. The rewards you get for doing them are pretty good too, be it new arts, weapons, skills, or costumes. Yet another great feature from the older Tales games that have faded away for some reason. Not like newer games don't have them, it's just that there used to be so many of them to unlock in-game rather than only a handful and the rest being through paid DLC. Overpriced DLC at that. They're cool and even carry over to cutscenes. If you're playing Definitive Edition, which I think is fair to assume is a yes, you even get access to all the costumes that you had to pay for in the PS3 version of the game. So if you miss out on a lot of these from missable side quests, you're guaranteed to have quite a bit regardless. There was also extra free DLC for Definitive Edition that gives you items, level ups, and more costumes you normally have to earn through side quests. I personally prefer earning them on my own, but it's nice that you don't have to fully miss out on every single one, and there are still a handful you have to earn in some of the game's quests. The boatloads of money and free levels were a bit much though, but whatever. Shops are pretty cool too. The main thing with them is item synthesis, as that aspect opens up quite a bit as you get to Act 2 of the game. Being that you learn skills through weapons and you gain access to so many at once, the rate at which you'll be learning new things is quite high. Not to mention there are a bunch of cool exclusive stuff you can synthesize, including accessories, boots that grant faster overworld movement, a diamond that lets you switch your controlled character mid-battle, and more. It's very in-depth and again requires the player to take the initiative to check the synthesis shop and see what new cool stuff there is to get, further emphasizing that the game and its, well, game aspects all require hard work to get the most out of them. And you know what, I think that's why I love this game so much after all these years. There's just a lot this game does right, but the mindset of honest to goodness work and rewarding the player for that work through an engaging battle system and tons of high tier items is right up my alley. It frustrated me to no end that people had a hard time getting into this game when Definitive Edition came out, because before then so many people called it one of the best Tales games. Why did that change so suddenly? Why is this game so mixed reception wise? I don't get it. Well, I didn't get it, but now I do, and while I wish the divide between older and newer Tales games wasn't as strong as it is now, it doesn't change how I feel about the game, and if you have the right mindset, you could end up enjoying it more yourself. Vesperia is such a fantastic game with a lot going on. It's just one that needs you to meet it halfway, and if you do, it'll heighten the experience that much more. Give yourself the time to learn it, and you could find yourself enjoying it as much as the newer titles for different reasons. I know I still do, even after playing all these other Tales titles since my first time through it, and it's why, despite all the criticisms against it, Vesperia still remains my favorite entry in the series. Look, I hate being predictable, I really do. I love throwing you guys off by saying random stuff to get a rise out of you all, and it works like a freaking charm, but I love this game so much. It's a treat visually, has some phenomenal voice acting, catchy tunes, fun towns to explore, dungeons to solve, an actual world map, and a battle system that's great at surface value and excellent when you delve into the skills and hidden techniques. I like to think I'm a hard worker, but what's hard work even worth if you aren't rewarded for your labor? That's why I stick with YouTube, because I know my hard work will eventually eventually be rewarded with more people watching my stuff and giving me a chance. Vesperia is a game that requires a lot of effort in order to get the most out of it, but the game makes sure your efforts don't go unnoticed. You've got one heck of a great entry if you put in the time, and it still remains a good time if you simply go through the motions. I wouldn't recommend doing that though, as if you're gonna want to enjoy the game to the fullest, I'd say take your time to understand the mechanics and maybe use a guide to do some of the side quests. Except the fill arms, for the love of your sanity, make this be the last thing you do in the post game because good lord. But other than that, become one with Vesperia and get intimate with it and you'll be in for one hell of a video game, let alone a Tales game. It may take some time, it may not always be fun, but when it clicks, I truly believe that you'll find Vesperia to be among the best in a top tier franchise. In other words, if you don't like Vesperia, you're probably playing it wrong. And that's Vesperia done! Try not to be too mushy and genuinely critique the game, as even though it's my absolute favorite, there's no such thing as a perfect video game. Hope it came across that way in my review, and I hope you enjoyed it. As for what's next, we'll leave that secret too. Patrons know though, and you can too for just $1 on top of other benefits. Kinda like getting early access to future videos, including the next review, an indie visual novel by the name of Valhalla, right the heck now. Unless you're a patron watching this video, since you got this one early too. Pretty sweet benefit, huh? Another one is getting thanked at the end of my videos, which I'll proceed to do right about now. In all sincerity, thank you from the bottom of my heart to Alex520, Cleric Eric, Comic Foil, Corbett, Floragrar, Forever Fizz 8, Gaius, Gentleman Gamer, Jacob Horner, James V, Katie, Kiara Loveday, Kibby7, Ludom James 115, Logan, Max Hockman, Mitchie, Renegade Master, Scott Appleman, Soul, Sora Cat, Steve Appleman, Tex-Mex, and Xenolith. You all are the best, and thank you, viewer, for giving my humble review a watch. Thanks for tuning in, drink plenty of water, remember that Vesperia is the greatest game to grace the industry, and I'll see you all in the next video. Catch you then, bye-bye!